The webinar will be recorded, and I am going to introduce our esteemed panelists. We are very glad to have them here. Olivia Blahut is the VIA Partnerships Lead for the East Coast. Olivia consults with cities, transit agencies, and private transit operators, helping them to identify their biggest mobility pain points and consider how transit technology can enhance their networks. Part consultant, part project manager, and part salesperson, Olivia acts as a conduit between VIA's partners and the many operational and technical teams involved in every partnership. Prior to VIA, Olivia was an engagement manager at the Surratt Group, where she led projects for Fortune 500 companies and early stage startups. She helped clients to define their sales strategies and priorities, develop proprietary customer insights, and build innovative go-to-market strategies. Olivia holds a BA in psychology and economics from Middlebury College. Rodger Lentz is the Chief Planning and Development Officer for the City of Wilson, North Carolina. Rodger's local government services spans nearly 25 years, with experience leading planning, community development, land development, code enforcement, inspections, GIS, downtown development, business and entrepreneurship development, and human relations. Rodger's service to the American Planning Association includes serving on the board of directors and foundation board, as well as serving as president of the North Carolina chapter. He currently serves on the board of directors of the Wilson Family YMCA. Rodger holds a BA in geography with a concentration in urban studies from UNC Greensboro, and a master's in geography with a concentration in urban and regional planning from UNC Charlotte. Welcome to Rodger and Olivia, and welcome to everybody in the audience. Very, very brief housekeeping. Most of you have used Zoom before. It's very easy. If you mouse to the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a couple of things you can do. We want everybody who's not a panelist to be muted. We have a Q&A button. If you have any questions at any point, please enter them there. We'll answer all questions at the very end. And if we have time, we'll answer verbal questions too. Any questions we're not able to answer during the webinar, we will answer after and post them on our website. Use the chat box if you have technical difficulties, and we will post everything within a week. So if you came in late, you'll see it all. So we are ready for our first panelist, Olivia. Take it away. Olivia, I think you're muted. Yeah.
I was muted. Yep. Can you all see my screen? Great. Thanks so much, Kara. And thanks everyone for inviting me and Rodger to join you today. We're both very excited to share a little bit more about microtransit broadly, and then a couple of considerations for sort of how one rural community has deployed it this past year. So we will, today we'll start with a little bit of an overview about what is microtransit, how does it work, both from a sort of agency or city perspective and from a rider perspective. We'll share some of the ways it can be used and actually the impact it can have on transit. And then I will turn it over to Rodger, who will walk through a little bit about the city of Wilson, what its transit sort of pain points were, why it thought microtransit would be kind of the right solution, and what it was like to sort of deploy microtransit within this city. And so Rodger will walk us through that portion of today's presentation. And then we'll talk through a couple of other examples of other rural communities throughout the US that have recently also introduced some form of microtransit into their networks as a way to make their own transportation more efficient, accessible, convenient, affordable. And hopefully those will serve as some inspiration for folks on this phone call. And then, as Karen mentioned, we will wrap up the time today by answering any questions that you all might have. So again, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to sharing some of these ideas with you. Okay, so the first question is, what is microtransit? And another question you all be asking is, what is VIA? And who is Olivia working for? So I work for VIA. We provide integrated solutions for every aspect of public mobility. So, technology basically, of course, you all know on this phone call, agencies and cities throughout the country are using technology in really exciting ways, sort of throughout their whole networks. So whether that comes from implementing on-demand public transit to do things like solve first and last mile questions, address transit deserts, replace underperforming bus routes, or even thinking about ways that technology can support scheduling or capacity management on fixed route, areas where technology can improve the experience for paratransit riders or NEMT riders, tons of ways in which technology is making transit better for all, for agencies and riders alike. So today we'll share a couple of examples of what that can look like. But microtransit specifically refers to, it's tech-enabled transportation, and you can think of it as living in the space between fixed route, which is operating, of course, on completely fixed schedules with traditional bus stops on a predictable schedule, and on the other end of the spectrum, ride-hailing technologies such as Uber or Lyft, where riders are sort of calling individual rides as needed. Microtransit fits somewhere in between, where its routes are completely nimble and dynamic. That is to say, there's no schedule, there's no traditional bus stops. Rather, both sort of vehicles and riders are routed to bus stops at any given time based on a specific request. Vehicles are routed to riders when and where they need a trip, and all of the routing is done in real time. That is, it's done based on things like road closures, traffic conditions, other ride requests, all of which are changed on the fly to make sure that the whole system is operating as efficiently as possible. Vehicles that can be used for microtransit really range. I think most typically we see smaller vehicles used like minivans, 6-seater vehicles. But microtransit can also be deployed with shuttles, cutaways, even full-size buses, just depending on what an agency or city has available and what ridership patterns tend to look like. So that is microtransit. How does it actually work? So at its core, microtransit, 3 things sort of need to happen in order for microtransit to work. The first thing that happens when a rider requests a trip on a microtransit service is that when a rider says, hey, I'm at my house and I would like to take a trip right now to the grocery store, the microtransit technology looks around, it identifies all of the riders in the system, all of the vehicles in the system, and it pairs up riders together who are traveling along a similar path. Then, once that sort of match has been made, so to speak, those riders who are traveling in one direction are matched with the best vehicle for that shared journey. And by best vehicle, I mean a vehicle that is kind of traveling in the right direction already, and that can accommodate any mobility needs that a rider might have. For example, if I'm a rider who uses a wheelchair, I would be dispatched a vehicle that can accommodate me, and a vehicle that has enough seats to accommodate my trip. So if I'm traveling with 2 friends, I will get a vehicle that has 3 empty seats for me. So riders and vehicles match together, and then they, the drivers, are also directed to what we call a virtual bus stop. So riders and drivers are then directed to meet at a point in space where it is both safe and efficient for that trip to be started. So there's no set bus stops when we're talking about microtransit. All of the rides initiate just at a kind of safe, best point in space to keep the whole system operating efficiently. From a rider's point of view, on the sort of front end of things, if I'm a rider, I use my phone, I input my origin or my destination, or I can make a phone call and request a trip. telling kind of an operator when and where I want to go. Then again, the software assigns a seat, given instructions to say, hey, go to the corner of Main Street and 3rd Street. I'm given walking directions to walk to that virtual bus stop. And then I'm actually sharing the ride with other riders who are traveling in the same direction as I am. So for me, it feels like I am calling a public transit bus to come pick me up when and where I need it. And I'm sharing the ride with other members of my community who are also traveling around on public transit. So it's kind of an exciting, convenient way for riders to move around their city that doesn't depend on them having to, memorize bus schedules, walk to a bus stop, keep track of where the bus is. You can think of it as really a customized way to work with public transit. Why, as far as the, oops, I went too fast. As far as the strengths of microtransit, I think one thing to be really clear about is that, there's a lot of power in identifying sort of the right tool for the right job. So I think we would never want to say that there's never a place for fixed route transit. I think, of course, in really high traffic, high frequency corridors, fixed route will always be sort of the most efficient way to move riders around a community. That said, I think a lot of cities and agencies are seeing a lot of success in exploring kind of a hybrid fixed route and on-demand model. And some of the benefits of sort of exploring where and how fixed route can fit into the network are as follows. I think the first is that, this on-demand mode can be a really strong complement to fixed route transit, helping to either expand the coverage of fixed route where funds might not be available, sort of fully expand a fixed route bus network. You can actually use on-demand as a first last mile solution to help folks specifically access fixed route transit. On-demand transit is both tech-enabled and convenient, so it can really help agencies to sort of meet the needs of next generation rider who has really high expectations for visibility, customized proposals, sort of a feeling of connectedness when it comes to city services. And it's also accessible so that legacy riders, vulnerable riders, riders with special needs can use these services as well. So it's a way to bring in lots of folks in the fold of public transit ridership. When deployed in the right place, microtransit can be quite cost effective, helping agencies towards smaller vehicles, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and really serve areas efficiently. And it's really flexible is the last thing I'll mention. For microtransit, it's quite easy to change the service zone, to change routing, to change service parameters. So as rider and community needs change, for example, as happened during COVID, microtransit can very easily be adapted to reflect the latest needs of your riders and of your agency. So that's a little bit about sort of why and some of like the strengths of an on-demand model. As far as what microtransit models can look like when incorporated into a transit network, we tend to think about 3 separate ways that communities can actually introduce microtransit. So the first is by actually incorporating on-demand technology into your fixed routes, which might be a little bit of an oxymoron. But what we've seen is that agencies can actually think about incorporating on-demand technology into fixed route to help with things like capacity management or to do bookings on fixed route so that vehicles are only traveling along fixed routes as it is requested by riders. So that's kind of the first option. The second option is using microtransit or on-demand transit as a complement to a fixed route service, really customizing your on-demand services so that they as feeders and extensions of your fixed route network. And the third is actually the decision to make a service completely dynamic. So in this case, that would be saying, all right, fixed routes actually aren't serving our community well. Maybe we're not dense enough to support them. Maybe ridership isn't consistent enough to support them. So rather, we should switch to a fully dynamic model where transit is the default. So we can talk about sort of the pros and cons of those 3 models later. But I say this just to say that there's not like a one-size-fits-all approach to how microtransit can fit in. And in fact, many agencies use a kind of hybrid approach of one or a couple of these models. Okay, with that, I will stop talking and I will turn it over to Rodger Lentz, who is talking to us from the city of Wilson, and he will share what you're all actually interested in hearing about, which is how did Wilson bring microtransit to your city, and what did it look like, and kind of what was their process along the way. So Rodger, I will continue to advance the slides, but I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Olivia.
Yep.
So thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing Wilson's story and then hearing the conversation afterwards. I don't have the advantage of knowing where all you are from, so I'll tell you a little bit about Wilson. Wilson's just under 50,000 people, so we're still in that rural category, and we're about 45 minutes east of downtown Raleigh. And for some of you in near larger cities, that 45 minutes is basically a travel through a rural landscape of farms and whatnot. So we're a separate city, standalone, the largest city of any size in our county, which happens to also be Wilson County. So don't get that confused. Wilson City, Wilson County. And we're in Eastern North Carolina, so it's a higher area of poverty. It's a very diverse population. Like many rural places, Wilson's economy was based on agriculture. Long ago, there's still a heavy dose of agriculture in our economy, but that is changing with pharmaceutical companies and other manufacturing plants. So we're one of the largest manufacturing centers around. So the economy is transitioning, which means, there's people that were reliant on some of those processing jobs for tobacco. We were a big tobacco town. And so that gives us the distinction of having really great jobs for folks, but we have quite a number of people that have not gotten retrained to hit those jobs. So we have a lot of unemployment as well. So we have great opportunity, but high unemployment. And so our fixed route that you see here was essentially a needs-based service. We're not a traffic congested town, maybe like many of you. Traffic congestion is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is getting people to jobs and to services that they need. So we have 6 routes. So we ran 3 on Saturday, and they're 60-minute headways. So not a very frequent service. And to me, that created an equity issue for our folks. So again, not being traffic congested, I have the privilege of having a vehicle, my private vehicle, and I can get anywhere I want to in Wilson in 15 minutes. And I mean anywhere. So think about that person that's working in a service job, 60-minute headway, they got to plan ahead, or, they need to go run to a medical appointment. You're talking about maybe 3 or 4 hours of your day for that one appointment that might take me an hour. That's not very equitable in my book. So not to mention our bus service could only, the funding that we had, we could only provide service in about 40% of the city. Our city's not the most pedestrian friendly place in the world, especially once you get past like the 1950s sort of first wave of development. So while that's something we're working on, that'll take us a long time to fix that problem. So it wasn't very convenient or safe to walk to bus stops and the like. And of course, if you were someone that had access to a smartphone and the bus is running late or whatever, there was no data to share to let you know what's going on in the system. So, not like a modern system like you might find in a Charlotte or Raleigh in our region. There's really no data. So we're just running buses on a route blindly, and people walk blindly to a bus stop, hoping the bus, shows up. Okay, go to the next slide. So we have been looking at this topic for quite some time. We had saw ridership declining to some degree, and our ridership was not, great to begin with. And when we started thinking about how we might transform transit in a city like ours, so what we want to see? Well, we want to drive people to jobs. So the jobs are no longer concentrated in the warehouses and the buildings downtown. while those are still important, there's a lot of corporate parks and things where these industries go that are no longer served by our transit system. They're beyond the reach of our fixed route transit system. Of course, improving, we have food deserts and the like many of you probably have. So getting people to critical services and retail establishments that all of us take for granted in our everyday life was very important. We want to be able to grow ridership. Not only do we want to serve the needs-based riders, but are there new populations of people that might be interested in transit if we provided something that was more convenient and tech-enabled? We all, many of you on this call probably have an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever your favorite smartphone is. That's our daily life. We're used to using that. And so there are some people that would not ride our bus, but for, providing new technology access. We also wanted to provide a higher quality of service. 60-minute headways is not convenient. To get it to 30-minute headway, I mean, you got to add more equipment. We didn't have the budget for that. So, how do we provide better service and not increase the transit budget? I'm not sure if our federal government's going to have more resources for transit or our state government's going to have more resources for transit. So doing more with the same amount of money, very important. And then when we started to look at it and then sort of the capital risk, that landed us to, thinking about, are we the best group to do it? All the things that the city would have to do to stand up a service like this. What if it didn't work? Are there third-party operators out there that might help us through this? And so ultimately, we'll go to the next slide. That's where we landed. We looked at sort of this idea of, well, we could just get software, we buy vehicles, we have drivers, we add more drivers, and we try to run the service ourselves. Then we talked about, well, maybe we should try it and pilot it. And so then we said, well, what if we took down one route and added this? But that didn't solve the 60-minute headway. It didn't solve the greater coverage, and we didn't have the budget. How many dollars would be available if we just took down one route? So at the end of the day, we decided that, let's go all in and let's do this for a year. Let's provide service to the entire city, which is over 30 square miles. And we were able to do that within the budget that we've had in the past for our fixed route. So what did we get? We got same budget, a not to exceed budget that was in line with what our current fixed route was. We're covering the whole city with 10 vehicles, and we're, instead of 60-minute headways, we're able to provide 15-minute or better average wait times and get people to now have access to their places, places where they have opportunities to work, more of our shopping areas, more neighborhoods, and at a price that was basically, really, if you took advantage of the discounts, less than it was to ride on the fixed route service. So that was all very important to us. And the other thing that was very important to us, while you see the iPhone image there to give you sort of a look and feel of what that looks like, we knew we had people that did not have, a credit card, didn't have access to a smartphone. So, we challenged VIA to help us solve those problems because we did not want to leave anybody out in launching a service like this. So I think that might bring us to the next slide. And those are the questions. So let's go, Olivia, through some of the questions that we had along the way and challenges that we gave to you all. So, the first question was about accessibility and how do we, how does this service, how could a service like this help us with those that had mobility challenges or maybe older adults? So, Olivia, how did we ensure that ride service is accessible to everyone?
Yeah, great question. And definitely something that, in partnering with public transit providers is always a key question. And I think there's three sort of specific ways that this question can be tackled. The first is by including sort of in-app accessibility features so that the software is usable for riders who might have hearing impairments, visual impairments. All of the software has been really refined after 8 years of feedback from riders taking paratransit trips, Gen Pop trips. Sort of the software has been honed to be quite accessible to a wide variety of riders. The second sort of bucket of ways is accessible to riders with specific needs is that the technology itself can be customized to make sure the service works really well for riders who might have limited mobility. So make sure that rider-specific vehicle assignments are available. So I mentioned earlier, if I'm a rider in a wheelchair, I indicate that in the app. I'm automatically dispatched a wheelchair accessible service or vehicle. The service I've mentioned, most of the riders are using what we call corner to corner rides. So you walk a block or two to your pickup point and then get picked up. But for riders who have mobility challenges, they can automatically receive door to door or curb to curb service as needed. And then the last is a bit more operational in nature. So we can do things like include step stools or mobility aids, handrails for riders who might have trouble getting in or out of the minivans to make it really easy for them to use the service. Comes to sort of driver partners to make sure that there's kind of specialized certifications and sensitivity lessons done to make sure that riders or driver partners understand how to sort of sensitively handle riders who might have different needs. So those are our sort of 3 key components to making sure that riders of all sort of levels of mobility feel really comfortable and like they're being served equitably with these services.
So we've had we're the smallest place in North Carolina that's not a university town that has this fixed route service. It's been in place for a long time. People are used to it. So how do we prepare our riders for this transition to a new service model to get them prepared for not having to stand at that sign on the that we have an image of?
Yeah, this is another great question that Rodger and his kind of transportation team challenged us to think about. And we know that it wouldn't be successful if we launched this, even if we launched the best service in the world, it wouldn't be considered a success if we had riders who felt left behind or like they didn't feel educated in what the new service looked like. And frankly, this is a big change, right? If you have riders who for 20 years have ridden a service where they know if on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. they walk to the corner of their block, they can get a bus ride. And then the next morning, that's not true. And there's a whole new way to book a seat, right? That's a really big shift. And so we wanted to work together to make sure that we were proactive educating riders on what they should expect, what the benefits of this new system were, so that everybody was like on board, literally on day one. So we had kind of an ethos of, no rider left behind. And so the way that we thought about rider education was really meeting riders where they are. So we did things like installing the signage that you see here at physical bus stops from the fixed route. The vehicles themselves are like quite remarkably branded. So they serve as nice walking billboards for the service. They generate a little bit of buzz and interest from riders. And then we also partnered with tons of different community organizations who had good influence throughout the city to educate the educators on the service and help make sure that sort of influential voices in the community were helping us to get the message out and helping us to like flag issues early to make sure that they were addressed. So certainly like a key part of launching this service was making sure that the community was really engaged along the way.
And I'll just add to that we, before we engaged with VIA to learn about that, we actually surveyed our riders on our current system to find out, would you be comfortable using a smartphone? Did you have a debit card? Would you, even if you have a debit, we have a lot of cash-based people, would you feel comfortable by using a debit card? Because there was a lot of fear about putting it, like your debit card number in the phone. And so we found that, about 35, maybe 40% of riders fell in that category. And so we challenged VIA with that. So given that, and I mentioned that we had a lot of needs-based riders. So these are people that might be underemployed, unemployed, older adults that are no longer in the workforce and on fixed income. So, they might be, like my grandmother who does not have a smartphone, will never have a smartphone, does have a bank account and not afraid to use her debit card. but not tied into technology and in banking in quite the same ways that many of us are. So that's a challenge for our current ridership. What did we do about these riders who didn't have the smartphones or bank accounts?
Yeah, definitely. As Rodger mentioned, like this is important for Wilson population specifically, but true of so many communities that are experimenting with technology like this, is the question of how to make it, excuse me, really accessible for new riders, but then also to make sure that for riders who are used to other payment plans or methods, that this will still work for them. So a couple options. So as far as trip booking, there's actually 3 ways that you can book a trip on Ride, which is the name of the microtransit service in Wilson. First is that riders can use the mobile phone application, as we've mentioned, to book. Riders can also actually make a phone call and talk to a real person to book their trip. And then third, riders can use a web booking platform to book their trip. All 3 of those options, serve riders differently based on their level of comfort with technology, their access to different types of technology, and sort of their excitement level about talking to a real live person on the phone. So all of those mean that folks can choose their fit as far as engaging with the service. And then when it comes to payment, riders can of course pay with sort of credit cards, debit cards, as you would typically pay for something in an app. But in this case, riders who don't have bank accounts or don't have credit cards or prefer not to link them to technology, like Rodger's grandmother, she, if she were taking a trip in Wilson, could use a prepaid voucher or a prepaid debit card to pay for the trip. So it's a way that we allow riders to, be able to use the service without necessarily needing to use a credit card or a bank account. Just another way that the services are sort of equitable transit for everybody.
So one of the weaknesses I mentioned in our previous legacy fixed route was lack of data. So there's not the grants in North Carolina for the rural systems like ours to get the technology that they use, and it's probably not cost effective. Like they use in Charlotte or Raleigh. So we didn't have a lot of great data. But we have reports that we have to do, and that was a kind of a painstaking hand count method I think they used previously. But data was very important to us. So how does with a system like yours, that was one of our challenges. Is we need data. We need to know what's going on. How can you help us with data access, and then of course the reporting that's required of us?
Yeah. So I think the key thing to note first of all is that our belief at least is that sort of if a city or agency is working with us, it's your data. And so we have a very sort of open book approach to sharing data and being transparent about service performance. And that said, we know that, transit agencies and cities, particularly who are receiving either FTA grants or formula funding or state grants. I've put some examples on the left side of this slide. But we know that agencies like that or cities like that are particularly beholden to uphold certain reporting standards. And so we can provide sort of turnkey dashboards for things like NTD reporting, any sort of like regulatory compliance that needs to happen. All of those can sort of become available or be exported out of the software. So a nice thing about microtransit is that because all of the rides are captured within the software, there's not really like a manual reconciliation of rides that needs to happen. Everything is captured in real time through the software, and then that all can be exported as very kind of easily usable data as well.
So we did a study, we didn't have great data, but we did a 4-month study. I believe it was 4 months, 3 or 4 month study. Had our very talented GIS people make a little tablet app so that our drivers could count and give us an idea of origins and destinations and the like. And so we got some pretty good data in that 4-month period. And of course, then COVID happened. And then we launched this service. So how do we do? How are we doing? And is the model going to be sustainable in the long term?
Yeah, so I think the exciting thing to note is that, as Rodger mentioned, sort of the city of Wilson, provided to VIA, they said, look, ridership is about 275 riders on like a weekday pre-COVID. then when we launched the service during COVID, ridership was about 55-ish rides a day. We've been excited to see that ridership has again sort of risen to above pre-COVID levels and seems to be kind of staying there, which is really exciting. And as Rodger mentioned earlier, sort of the cost of this service is roughly comparable in budget to the existing fixed route, which is exciting. And so we feel like as ridership hopefully continues to grow, as folks travel around more and COVID lessens, we'll be able to sort of add more rides without necessarily adding more vehicles at the same level. And so that will further increase the efficiency of any given trip. So we're excited to kind of see what that looks like. And we've frankly, I think the most exciting thing of launch has been that is actually driven public transit ridership at a time when in most communities throughout the country, transit ridership is, if not totally declining, is at least stagnant. So it's been really nice to see that this has been a good tool for Wilson to actually get folks, riding again and back onto the system.
So, for us, the what's next, so we've been in this since we launched September the 1st. So we're September, October, 2.5 months in, getting great reviews, getting really great feedback from both our elected officials and the riders. I know when I take it from time to time, I always ask the driver how things are going, or, about half my rides have actually been shared, which is really interesting with one or more people. We do limit ridership right now. I think it's 4 in the vehicle instead of the 6, so that there can be some distancing between riders. But about half the people I asked had not taken the bus before. So they were not a fixed route user in Wilson. And the other half, were fixed route users. Or in fact, one of our drivers talked about how in the 90s, she was a bus rider and now she's a driver, and talking about how wonderful it is. And the anecdotes we get about, the fact that, now I now have the freedom of not planning ahead when I need to run to the store to get, milk, bread, and eggs, before the hurricane comes or something like that, is really important to folks, and meeting people that are using it for their work transportation when, when I asked them what their solution was before, begging for a ride from a friend or something like that to get to their place of employment. So we're very excited about that. And this is all during COVID. So, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I was a betting person, I would say that the bet would be that if we are already exceeding the bus route numbers and exceeding, the 300, 320 rides per day, that will continue to go up as COVID, has some relief. North Carolina, as the rest of the country has been predicted, is seeing, cases go up. Wilson's not immune to that at all. Rural areas are especially impacted. So, we might see a dip as, if our governor decides there needs to be more lockdowns or whatnot. But, I would expect that when vaccines come out and we're able to open back up, that we're going to continue to see growth in the system. Ridership engagement has been great. We have seen during the first month, we did provide people with 10 free rides. We saw a small dip when that ended, and then that growth continued to go up. And so we've been growing week over week, every week, except for last week when we had 10 inches of rain and flooding. We had a small dip, but maybe all the systems in North Carolina saw that with 10 inches of rain. I don't know, but yeah, not great weather. So that was our one exception of dip, but we'll excuse that to 10 inches of rain in a day and a half. And the data's been going well. We're working on that, as we're working with NCDOT on figuring out what are the reporting things that they want to see. And so they're a great partner of ours. And in fact, partnered with us on the next topic, which is an FTA AIM grant. So I think I'd seen a question in the chat about, did you get a startup grant? We did not get a startup grant. We're using the various pots of funding that's been available to our fixed route, including $5311. And North Carolina shifted a lot of transit funding, at least in the rural areas, to some CARES Act money that became available. And in fact, as we were talking about launching this program, Olivia probably got tired of my panicked calls where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just heard another pot of funding is going away and I don't know how we're going to replace it. And then, then we started getting word about the CARES Act and how it could be used. And so we were able to plug forward. But we also had applied for this AIM grant, because what we wanted to do with the AIM grant was see, could we expand and try some evening hours or some Sunday service, things that we had not had the money to do before. So we were awarded a $250,000 AIM grant. NCDOT will be the lead agency on that for us. They were gracious enough to be our partner and take on that burden. And then we'll work with them on, what are the things that we want to add. So doing some survey work to find out from riders what might be the best way to utilize this money, and see if we get adopters of trying some different service hours than we've traditionally been able to offer. So that's very exciting. And so I think Olivia is going to share with you a few other rural communities that are looking to deploy this technology.
Sure. Thanks, Rodger. Yeah, so I'll wrap up here before we turn it over for questions. I think we have about a little under 20 minutes left, so I will be brief, but thought it could be helpful to hear about some other agencies that are using on-demand transit in really exciting ways. So I will start off by talking about Ben Franklin Transit out on the West Coast. I'm sure some of the listeners on this call are out there. So we'll fly across the country. And Ben Franklin Transit, sort of the challenge was a lack of access to affordable, efficient, and convenient fixed route public transit. And so they launched a really innovative service back actually right at the sort of the early days of COVID. But they launched a very exciting service that covers 6 different zones throughout their service area. Originally, the service was conceived pretty specifically to help riders go to and from fixed route transit stops. So you can see in each zone on the right here, each of those polygons includes a fixed route transit hub. So that was the first goal of the service. However, because the service was actually launched at the height of the COVID pandemic, I should say, the service was actually adapted at launch to also provide rides to really essential destinations like pharmacies, grocery stores, healthcare centers, really showing kind of the flexibility of the service model, making sure that, not only did this rural community have continued access to fixed route, but also this service was able to help provide people to really life-sustaining resources during a very critical time. And I think that if you all were to kind of look across other case studies of agencies across the US, you would see this idea of like agile microtransit being used as a way to help, just to be one more tool as agencies help their communities to fight against COVID. So that's a really kind of interesting example of one community. Another community I'll talk through is Baldwin County in Alabama. Their challenge was that their kind of dispatch team was manually scheduling and booking each ride for sort of all riders, which placed a significant limit on the sort of types of trips that could be served. They have a pretty expansive service area of about 2,000 square miles. What they've done is they actually have launched a service that allows riders to book their own rides using a mobile application or calling in to book a trip. And what they've done is they've actually designed kind of a series of different trip types, some of which are totally on demand, some of which are booked with 3 hours in advance, and some of which are booked 12 hours in advance. So there's offering 3 different trip types within one app, all of which help riders move around this very expansive service area very well and will help the agency to kind of manage their fleet effectively across all of this broad coverage area and all of these different types of trips. And then the last example I'll talk through is a little bit different, actually. So what Rodger's talked about in Wilson and the examples from Ben Franklin Transit and Baldwin County are all kind of general population transit services. Hampton Roads Transit actually is, this is a service that is a paratransit, an ADA paratransit service. They were experiencing sort of challenging quality of service issues. So some trips were missed. There was a 72-hour in advance call ahead requirement. Routing was a bit long, in some cases quite circuitous. And so back in the beginning of 2020, they launched a technology-enabled paratransit solution. And they basically combined 3 legacy services together and launched one service to rule them all. What's really exciting about this from a rider perspective is that, of course, riders can still pre-schedule trips or pre-book trips as you would on most paratransit services. But they're also enabling same-day trips for paratransit riders in HRT, and have launched an app for riders to use as well. So it's just a couple of examples. And of course, as far as, you know, rider convenience, those things really matter, same day and mobile app booking important. But for the agency, you know, they're also seeing on-time performance has significantly increased. You know, it's 95% on-time performance compared to 84% prior to VIA. So they've been really excited to see kind of the increase in quality of service that riders can expect from using these services. Happy to share more about kind of any of these cases in questions or sort of offline as well. But hopefully those serve as a good inspiration for other ways that agencies are using technology throughout the country. And I think that is it. We will pause for questions. Kara, I will stop sharing my slides, and we can hopefully have you let us know what questions you think would be best for us to talk about.
Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Oh, Kara, I think you're muted.
Yeah,
there you go.
I just realized that. So thank you so much, Olivia and Rodger. That was such a great presentation, and you shared so much knowledge. I can tell by the questions that we got that people really are interested in maybe deploying this in their own areas. So we've received over 30 questions. They're coming fast and furious. So we'll have you answer as many as you can. And then the rest I'll send to you after, and we'll get the answers summarized on our website. So I'm just taking them as they come and try to write notes, but we'll hear them live from the panelists. One thing I will say, please type your questions, audience, into the Q&A box. Please do not type it into the chat box. If you have typed it into the chat box, please copy and paste it into the question box. So the very first question we got, and I think we did see some examples. Maybe you want to go back to one of those screens. Could we see an example of how this actually looks in a device, on a phone?
Sure. Yeah, we have some smallish examples. Might be hard to see, but I have some tiny ones. So, and I'm happy if anyone wants to email me after this. I'm happy to like walk through a little bit more detail. But I mean, for riders on a phone, you know, they're shown kind of a map of the service area when they open up their app. And they can input their current location, they input their destination. They can do that either by typing in those addresses or actually just putting a little pin on them on a map. And then a vehicle is dispatched to them. Once they're assigned a vehicle for a trip, they can actually see the vehicle approaching them on the streets. They can get information about like the vehicle make or model or license plate, whatever you want to show. And then other parts of this app that obviously are not shown in this picture, they can also do things like enter account information or indicate if they are a wheelchair rider, indicate if they're like a senior or a student qualifying for any concessions. They can leave feedback, they can ask for help, they can enter different payment information. So they can kind of do a lot to customize the app, but at its core, it's really an app to let them sort of book and track and pay for the trips.
Great. Okay. And thank you. The second question, what is Wilson's productivity in terms of boardings per vehicle service hour? I know you gave some data. Was that one of the data points you covered, or is it something you could answer now or later, Rodger?
I don't have the latest data in front of me, but it's around that 3.7 to 4 riders per hour is what we're seeing here now lately.
Yep.
Very good. And also, what percentage of the vehicle time in Wilson is ride time versus waiting for a ride time?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't have that data. What I will say is when we initially set up the service around the city, we had these places called, I don't know, for lack of a better term, a home base for each vehicle. So they'd be scattered around the city so that, you know, they wouldn't have to drive all the way across the city every time. So, and what I'm told is that now, given our ridership levels, very rarely does a vehicle have to go back to their base. In other words, they're dropping somebody off and they already have another ride set up. So, you know, I don't have a great answer for you other than that. And so I think anecdotally that means that there's not a lot of downtime.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Rodger. And what I would just add is that sort of drivers are never permitted to just be like circulating, waiting for trips. They're always being either proactively routed to their very next trip, like I mentioned, like Rodger mentioned, or to what Rodger mentioned, that idea of like a terminal or a home base, which is basically like a smart area that's like sensible for a vehicle to be waiting in and is sensible based on like their current location and where we think the next trip will happen.
Sounds like a very productive service. Okay, the next question is, how frequently do the buses run to Raleigh in North Carolina?
Well, we don't have any bus service.
No.
I mean, there's like Greyhound or Amtrak that'll take you to Raleigh. So we don't run that. So I have no idea, unfortunately.
Okay. And the next question, are you restricting ride sharing capacity in smaller minivan type vehicles in light of the pandemic? If so, how are you doing this?
Yeah, so Rodger mentioned this, but typically the passenger capacity of one of these vans is 6 passengers. For Wilson, we've restricted it to a maximum capacity of 4. That happens automatically. So the software is always tracking how many people are in a vehicle, how many seats are available, how many seats are going to be available. And basically rides just will not get booked on a trip on a vehicle unless there will be fewer than 4 people or fewer on a vehicle. And that number is customizable. We have some partners who switched to totally private rides when COVID started. Some switched to 2 or 3 passengers per trip. It's pretty easy to switch.
And I think it might be useful to know that via, you know, they obviously clean the vehicles regularly, but then they installed this
like a partition.
Clear barrier. I don't know what it's made out of, but a clear barrier to have a barrier between the, you know, the driver and the riders. And as well as, you know, the drivers obviously wear a mask. The way the governor's orders work in North Carolina, we can certainly recommend to the rider that they wear a mask, but you cannot deny a ride to someone that is not wearing a mask. So, but, you know, and the times that I've been with other folks, I can't recall a time being on when someone wasn't wearing a mask. So I think people are heeding the advice quite well.
And there's going to be, you know, other questions coming up about COVID, but that one probably answered some of those too. Now you mentioned funding, but this question specifically is, did Wilson get a startup grant to start this program?
No startup grant, just the typical monies that we got before for the fixed route. And the only additional grant that we specifically applied for here was the FTA AIM grant. I think the DOT staff and the FTA staff are still working through sort of the grant agreement paperwork. So hopefully sometime in the next month or two, we'll be able to start utilizing those funds to experiment with, you know, the various hours or days of service that might help folks that we've not been able to serve previously.
Okay, thanks. Now, here's another question. What is the city's cost per trip on the former fixed route service and the new service? I don't know if you can answer that. And then here's one I believe you did answer already. Have initial ridership levels compared to the former fixed route service? I know they went up. So
especially on the weekend. So the weekend rides, I think we showed you the slide on the weekday, which was, we were in the 250s, maybe 270s on certain days of the week with the fixed route. We've had here lately, I think every day, we're averaging above 300 per day now. On the weekend, Saturday service on the fixed route was averaging about 120. And Saturday service here over the last several weeks has been in the 250 to 70 range. So weekend service has more than doubled, which is really great.
That's wonderful. Okay.
And I don't have, and we would have to get, I don't have the cost figures.
Yeah.
Our transit manager, Grona Jones, is not on the call, but I'm sure that's stuff that she would have. I don't have that data handy. And I would say for the ride service, we're still maturing. So, I think if we quoted you a cost per ride now, it's going to be higher than it's going to end up. But I would say, given the budget, so if we're using just the budget figures, right, and we have an equal budget, and the rides, the rides are now exceeding the fixed route, then just using my anecdotal math without giving you the exact numbers, my cost per ride has to be less because I'm serving more people with the same dollars.
Makes sense. Okay, so next question. And we are getting towards the end. We're not going to get all the questions, but we'll get in the next couple of minutes. What kind of marketing comfort level differences do you see with fixed route versus the more new feel of microtransit?
I see what you're saying there. So what I'll say is that, so we allow people to rate, and I think they can rate via the phone, or in the app, it gives them questions. Of course, like I said, I ask questions of riders when I go, and I know our elected officials who, as many small towns, you probably have close contact with your elected officials. I'm no different. And all the feedback I'm getting is positive, so positive. I think our rating is like, Olivia, like 4.9 out of 5 stars, maybe 4.85. I don't know, but we'll call it very high. So people are thrilled with the service, and what elected officials are telling me is their constituents and their districts are talking about the freedom that they've gotten by not, 60 minutes versus a 60-minute headway versus 15 minutes. People being able to jump, they're thrilled. They have not had this freedom. In order to have that freedom, they would have had to get maybe a very expensive private taxi ride or something like that. This has changed people's lives, is what we're told. And that's what makes me thrilled to be able to offer this service in a community like Wilson. I'm blessed. I get to travel. I get to go to places like New York City and Chicago and DC, and obviously I love the systems there. I can get around, never need a car. It's awesome. I jump on my Amtrak, go to DC, get off. I'm in Union Station. I jump on the metro. I get anywhere I want to go in that city, and I can walk just about anywhere I want to once I get off the metro. Rural places aren't like that. And those metros are running what, every 7 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, depending on the time of day. At night, maybe it's 20 minutes. In rural places, we're not going to be building light rail. We're not going to be building trolleys and the like. We are going to be beholden to the vehicle or walking or bikes. And what this has done is it's given people the same sort of freedom they have in the big cities, is my opinion. I'm sure there'll be people that look at it, well, the cost per ride, or it's only so many persons per ride in a vehicle. If we take just the pure mathematical measurement out of it, and we put the human element of measurement into this has changed people's lives in Wilson, North Carolina. And that's what it's all about.
Wow. Wow. What a success story. And I can tell, you know, everybody still has a lot more questions. In fact, we have 55 more, so we could have
We'll be
spent an
busy.
entire day talking to the two of you. We're going to just thank you for your wonderful presentation, your knowledge, your sharing, and thank VIA, thank the City of Wilson, thank National RTAP, and certainly thank you to everyone in our audience for attending today. Like I said in the beginning, we will be posting the recording, the PowerPoint, and the questions and answers, at least the recording and the slides within a week. And we will be posting the questions and answers as soon as we can. And we'll have more to come. So thank you so much and have a wonderful microtransit day, everybody. We hope to see you at another National RTAP event in the future.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Take care.
And Kara, are you planning on sending the questions to Rodger?
Yes.
Yes, good.
In the webinar now, and all the questions will be answered.
Because people stayed to the very, very end. We had 64 people on until very, very end. So people really want to know.
Yeah.
Yes, and they're still on. So Robin, I never did get to introduce you since you came on a little late, but we're so Executive Director, Robin Phillips.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Thanks for doing this. I think it was a really different perspective on these things, and I saw a lot of people online who are really part of the rural transit industry and research, and some of the state DOT people that we work with. So I'm really hopeful that this will give people some ideas about more ways to serve people in their communities. And I know the Ben Franklin system, and it's really interesting. They've done really interesting and innovative things for a long time. They were running taxi vouchers for the evening hours for years and years so that they could extend the time where people could get to work.
Yeah. I know I saw in the transportation authorization bill that's been floating around a specific mention of microtransit. And so I'm hoping that you know, that might mean some more funding, because obviously, you know, I can do a lot with, if I have unlimited money, I can do a lot, right?
Can't we all?
Yeah, that's not the reality though. So, but you know, and what I told our DOT friends, NC DOT friends, and they've been really supportive of this and helping us launch this in North Carolina. There are, and I've told VIA this, I said, you know, honestly, across America, there's more cities like Wilson than there are cities like Chicago. And they have specific, you know, they have specific transit challenges in the big cities. Absolutely. Yep. And they should, you know, they're the ones that get talked about in the media all the time. So they're the darlings, right? But there are a heck of a lot more cities in the 50,000 or less. In North Carolina, you know, many cities, you know, the 25,000 person city is the norm. And, you know, many of them with only, with no transit other than the county transit system that, you know, only operates, you know, you got to call a day ahead, which that's an important service. Don't get me wrong, but
oh, no, I understand you. It's just that you're looking at actually respecting and supporting the people that are in your community to have